Welcome to the Bergstrom Bunch podcast. I'm Jason.
And I'm Kathy.
Recently, we've had several young people express to us that they were afraid of, well, maybe hesitant's the right word, hesitant to have kids in today's culture. And on one of our recent podcasts, someone asked us the question, would you guys have kids if you were starting, or if you were raising them today, would you have kids? And so we wanted to weigh in on that question in light of today's culture.
Yeah. And actually, our son Caleb, that was a question that he said to me, or that was something he stated to me, was, Mom, I'm not sure if I want to have kids with what's going on in the world today. So I think that there definitely is a huge fear. And what's interesting to me, actually, is I can't remember where I saw it, but it's on some social media. But Elon Musk actually was asked, what is the greatest peril, or what is the greatest issue that society is facing right now? And he said depopulation. He said that the population growth is not exceeding, or it's not keeping up with decline. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, but we think about the fear that someone would have to have kids. I mean, I get it. You look at the news and you see culture falling apart. You see war. I mean, there's so much going on in culture that there is definitely reason to be afraid of that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, it's more appealing potentially to get like a four-legged baby because at least you know that your four-legged baby isn't going to say to you one day, oh, I'm kind of confused about whether or not I'm a boy or a girl, or I'm addicted to this, or somebody showed me this. Those are the types of things that parents or people that are potentially thinking about parenting are dealing with today.
Well, I think this gender confusion is a primary driver of someone's hesitation to have kids.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's jump right into the question. Would we, and we haven't collaborated, but would we have kids if we were in our 20s just getting married right now? Would we have kids in today's culture?
Yeah. Well, I understand everybody's hesitancy because, we do live in a very heightened sexualized culture right now that lends to, honestly, a lot of fears. And even like I think about the days where you didn't have to lock your doors. You didn't have to worry about the types of things that we have to worry about today in our culture. And we didn't have... I don't want to say agenda because I know that's kind of a controversial word, but we didn't have this drive, as it seems, to propagate certain things that we're seeing right now. And so it just seems like kids are exposed to so many different ideologies and different experiences that when we were raising kids, they were never exposed to. And we didn't have to worry about them necessarily being exposed to those things that now everybody else does.
Well, so I'm going to disagree with you a little bit.
Okay.
The world has never been a safe place. It's the same question when our parents were having kids, when we were having kids, it's the same question. Like, well, look at the world today. It's so much worse than the previous generation. Yeah. Like, the next generation is messed up. And I like Aristotle in the 4th century BC said the same thing. He's like, man, these young people, like he said, I'm going to read it. He said, they're high-minded because they have not yet been humbled by life, nor have they experienced the force of circumstances. They think they know everything, and they were always quite sure about it. And then you have, even in like the 1700s, this guy wrote about how the youth of today are poisoned because they have all this access to romance novels. Another one in the 1700s wrote that the next generation is falling apart because they play chess. They're in part of chess clubs, and everywhere kids are playing chess, and so that's going to be the downfall of society. I mean, today if your kid's in chess club, you're like, whew, he's a good one. But that was the fear. And then in the 1800s, this guy wrote how today's generation of young people is tenfold worse than the previous generation. So my question would be, what time frame do you want to go back to?
Okay,
we romanticize
hold on.
When we were young.
You're going to disagree with me. Let me interject a little bit. You're talking about times past, and I understand that we always think about, the next generation is worse. But have we ever seen anything as unprecedented that we see now when it comes to the attack on the traditional family?
Yes.
And we're talking about across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at the first century church. Okay. So here are these people trying to live totally countercultural to the way the Roman Empire was run. And here's a time when you went into the marketplace, you would have to offer a pinch of salt to a statue of Caesar and say, Caesar is Lord. If you didn't do that, you could not enter the marketplace. You couldn't shop there. You couldn't buy your meat and vegetables. You couldn't get in. Also, low in culture was the value of marriage. There's stories of a Roman man. He was on his 25th marriage, and his new wife was on her 27th marriage. You could just divorce your wife or your husband for whatever reason you wanted. At the same time, having a catamite, that is for a man to have a prepubescent young boy as their sexual partner and friend, was widely accepted. And so you look at the attack on the family, that was it.
Okay, well, and so just to say that in recent times, that's kind of where we're at. And I think that's why people are scared. I mean, even now, right now, there's this whole new trend that's MAPS, which is minor attracted persons. And that's come up where they're not calling them pedophiles anymore. Now they're moving in that direction to make it more acceptable. So I think that when we're talking about going back to Roman times, and I said, has there ever been any time that has been as unprecedented as now? You're citing Roman times, and we're swiftly getting there. Like, it's been expedited, and it seems like the culture is perpetuating all of that. So I understand. I'm just saying that I understand the fears today as far as raising kids. And, it's interesting. It's not even about the fear of parenting. It's the fear of what my kids are going to be exposed to and what I'm going to have to deal with in the culture.
Yeah. So part of that is our access to the information, right? In some respects, like, crime is going down. Various crimes, but it seems like it's accelerating because we have access. You used to read the news, you'd have a couple sheets in the newspaper of the news, and the rest was editorials.
Now we know the news across the country.
Obituaries,
we know the news all
we
over
have
the world.
instant access to it, and so we see it. It's just filtered. It's TV, it's social media, and so we can see when you can look on the news and read about 40 murders that happened in the last week all throughout the world. It makes you feel like there's a murder around every corner. But I don't know that when we were kids and you just ride bikes all day and be home by dark, I don't know that the world is less safe than it was, but it sure feels that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you can look and you can find a map of all the sexual predators and where they live. We didn't have access to that when we were growing up. That doesn't mean there were none.
No, that's true.
We just didn't know about it.
I agree with that. However, I would say that we're still seeing a great increase. And I do think that it is being perpetuated by the culture around us, and especially the types of music that's coming out that, elevate certain types of violence and things like that. And I think that that's what potential parents are concerned about. They're looking at, when I have a child, what this child could be exposed to. And so there is a huge fear. And I think that 2020 probably instilled that even deeper, because 2020 everybody was afraid. Everybody was afraid of dying.
Yeah.
Everybody was wearing a mask. Everybody is afraid of what's going to happen. Am I going to lose my job, my business, everything?
A huge bad news story every month.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're in a culture that is propagating on a regular basis something to be afraid of, then I think that it's almost like a spirit in the air, as some would say, like this spirit of fear that just grips everyone. And then they start thinking, man, I don't want to have kids. I don't want to bring any child into the world in this type of situation.
Yeah. Well, so we want to acknowledge the fear. There's this valid fear, because you're going to send your kid to school thinking he's going to get a good education, and found out that some drag queen came in to read stories to him at school. And what is this? And so the kids are being exposed to that. But so let's address that fear head on, because I think when you say I'm too afraid to raise kids in this culture, there's two big things that you're saying. One is that the force of culture, the influence of culture, is more powerful than the influence of God. Like, God can't work in this culture. When I was growing up, sure, God could work because culture wasn't as bad as it is now. But now with this new wave of evil, that's more than God is able to work through me, work in my kid's life, to do something. It's too much. Sure. It's too much for God.
Sure.
And maybe we don't frame it that way, but I think we need to frame it that way and just verbalize. That's actually what I'm saying. That's that fear.
Yeah,
that's what I'm feeling.
Don't you think that that's because we've reduced God to just words on a page? We've reduced him to words on a page, and he's not big enough to control our lives, to control the outcome.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. I think parents that are afraid need to own that that's their fear, need to own that. That's what, okay, I'm afraid because I don't feel like God is big enough.
Sure.
Or powerful enough or present enough.
Well, but getting back to the question at hand, which is, would we? I think I already told you this, that my first thought was the quote from, or the poem that Tennyson did. I'm not going to quote the whole thing, but it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. And I do think about like military wives or military spouses in general, because some men have wives that are in the military and they go and they're deployed and you don't know what the outcome's going to be. So, I've thought about this, like, would I have rather never married than married and been in love and had to experience the loss? Or would I rather have never had a child than have a child and experience the loss or the difficulty? So I think it's kind of like, if you're living in fear, then you're almost expectant that bad things are going to happen versus anticipant of the great things and the great joy that you can experience from having that little person around.
Yeah. I mean, kids are tough in any generation. Diapers.
True story.
And,
yes.
No, it's
true story.
Yeah, it's tough. But
absolutely,
it's worth it. Kids are fun. I think in looking at that fear, addressing, look, maybe I don't trust God enough. There's a second piece of that, though, saying I don't trust my own leadership. I don't trust my own ability to parent this child, to raise them up right. I don't trust my influence. I don't trust and
that the culture's influence is going to be greater than your own.
Yeah. And here's the thing, is that we learned this in youth ministry, we learned this in adopting kids, we've seen it over and over, that parents are afraid of peer pressure and cultural pressure and every influence on their kid, but parents overlook the fact, they miss it, they're blind to it, that they are the greatest influence on their kid's life. When you have kids in your home, you're in charge. Yeah. You're in charge of what they eat. You're in charge of the entertainment they consume in the home. You're in charge of everything that goes in. You're in charge of whether or not they yell in the home or not. You may not think so. You are. You're in charge of whether or not they become lazy or whether or not they learn how to do chores. You're the parent. You are the sovereign. You feed them, you care for them, and that gives you a lot of authority in their life.
Okay, so what would you say then to the young person, like our son or any others that are newly married and they're still deliberating? Do I want to have kids anytime soon because the culture just seems to be rapidly going downhill? What would we say then to encourage them? Because, I mean, obviously for me, having had kids, I would say absolutely I would have children because I know the joys of having children. And so wrapping our minds around that here in the culture that we're in today, I mean, we do things God's ways, so ultimately we know that, God wanted us to have kids. But for young people that are like, well, does God want me to have kids now? Does he want me to wait? Does, 5 years, 10 years until all this craziness goes away, which it's never going to get any less crazy.
There's a quote from a novel called Those Who Remain that says, hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men.
Yeah.
And weak men create hard times. So if we're saying we're in hard times, this is the fertile soil for strong people to develop.
Yeah.
And so if if good people stop having kids and raising kids, I promise you this: the bad people, the evil people, the cultural people that we don't agree with, right? They're going to still have kids.
Hold on. I'm going to get spicy on you then a little bit because you disagreed with me.
Bring it. Okay.
So hard times create strong men, right?
Yeah.
Strong people. We're not in hard times. Our times are pretty good. We want for nothing. So we're seeing, that's part of the reason we're seeing such a cultural decline when it comes to a lot of things that we would consider morality as far as in God's eyes. And I think that the biggest thing is all these young people that are contemplating, do we want to have children? They're looking at everything around them, and they are confused. They're confused about whether or not they're going to be able to lead strong. They're confused about, are they going to be able to be the strongest influence in their children's lives? Are their children going to grow up with other children that have the same values, have the same focus? And and that's a weighty decision. It really is a weighty decision.
Except that this is the whole premise of this conversation: is we're looking at culture saying, wow, this is rough. And so depending on where you are at and looking at culture, you would say this is hard times.
Yeah.
The political divisiveness,
absolutely,
the racism, or people trying to sexualize the kids, right? So we would look and say, yeah, this is a difficult time. Financially, we could say, yeah, a lot of people are well off. But when you look at culture, you say, wow, this is tough. Somebody needs to do something about this. And that's the fertile soil for people to rise up and to step up into who they're supposed to be. And so that's a great spot to bring kids into and to teach them, look, there's something to do here. There's a purpose that we need to be after. And that is why our family doesn't engage in the things that culture engage in. We're going to be different. We're going to swim upstream.
Well, I mean, you try to be in the world but not of the world. And I think that when it comes to having children, the biggest thing that, as I thought about this, because honestly, I've thought to myself, how do I feel about my children, like having grandchildren in this culture? And I said, you know what, to myself, I thought, that's where Mama Bear is going to come out. You can only poke the bear so much before then mama's gonna do something about it. And so I think that the biggest thing is you just need to think to yourself, if I'm going to have children, am I going to be present and active? Am I going to engage? Is this a responsibility I'm going to take very, very seriously? But then you have to have eternity in mind.
Yeah.
I just think about like even parents who have had children and at a young age they've passed away for whatever reason, health issues or whatever, and those parents would never have sacrificed the time that they had with those children because of the pain that they felt due to that loss. And so that's where I would say, of course for me, I do want to be a grandparent, but I have thought about all of those things, and their fears have been my fears as well. But that's where I've just had to come to the conclusion that God is definitely bigger. And I know that sounds cliche, but it really is about, if you're going to raise kids in a culture that is heavily depraved, and we've seen that over the years, then, and especially if you see the momentum going in that direction, that it's not getting better, then you need to make sure that you're in a place where you're ready for that responsibility. But I will say this, it's interesting that once that little person comes into the world, you find yourself all of a sudden ready for that responsibility. And it grows you, and it matures you, and it makes you a different, and I would even say better person.
Yeah. Well, I honestly think this is a conversation we need to pick up in a future podcast, and we can dial in specifics, but
sure.
I would say for someone questioning, should I have kids or should I not? If we go back to some of the things we looked at, you need to make sure you are someone who is influential. There's going to be an influence in that kid's life. Like, you're not going to let the tablet raise them.
Yeah.
You're gonna trust your own leadership over a kid. You're gonna trust your own parenting ability, and if that means getting some skills as a parent, absolutely. Yeah. If you look at your parents, you're like, well, they didn't do a good job. Well, learn from someone else, right? And then the first thing that we looked at, like, you have to trust that God is bigger. And so really leaning into God's strength and making sure your life is surrendered to Christ, and that you can walk in his strength and his wisdom, because we've seen throughout generations people raise incredible kids that were difference makers, no matter how wicked or dark the society they were in. That's not the factor. God is the constant.
So I would just close us out with this by saying, if you remember, Moses was born, and he was born at a time when Pharaoh was killing off all the Hebrew babies. And his mom, out of faith, she still gave birth and, set him upon the Nile. You've got crocodiles in there. You've got all sorts of predators, if you will. And yet, when you know the stories of Moses, his life was very, very significant. So just to say that you just never know, even though it might seem like everything around you is out to steal, kill, and destroy, so to speak, when it comes to your children, that if you have a child, that child does have a purpose, and you don't know exactly what that purpose is, but God does, because God's the author of life.
If there was ever a time to question whether or not you should have kids, when the Pharaoh has an edict that your son must be thrown into the crocodile-laden Nile, that's a time to not have kids. So that's a great example.
I just came up with that on the fly because I
awesome.
thought about it.
All right,
so,
come on.
We just, for those that are listening, we fist bumped just now. So anyway, fun times.
Well, so here's what we want you to do. We want you to send in your thoughts and your questions, because we want to be a resource for you. We want to answer those questions. And, of course, if you haven't done it yet, you got to subscribe, like, comment, share. And
show the love.
So we thank you for joining us, and we're going to continue this conversation in a future episode, and we look forward to having you back again real soon.